Hey, everybody. Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. I'm your host, Roman Zelichenko, a former immigration attorney turned entrepreneur. I am the co-founder and CEO of Laborless, which is an H-1B compliance tech company, and GMI Rocket, which is a digital marketing agency for the immigration industry, and of course, which brings you this show. So today we have a really amazing episode. We have a returning guest, but I'll be talking to two people. So it's a returning guest with one of his colleagues, episode 101. And so we will be speaking to Jared Jaskot and Lory Rosenberg, who are part of the Access 61 team. So Access 61 is a tech company that effectively marries AI and technology with immigration court representation, specifically asylum and other humanitarian cases, to bring low cost and highly quick, I suppose, immigration services to folks who are filing for asylum. It's really interesting. It leverages limited scope representation, which we're going to get into. It's super innovative. I'm really excited to have this conversation. Before we jump into this discussion, I do want to give a thanks to the main sponsor of this episode, which is Lex Reception. So for the immigration attorneys who are watching this, Lex Reception is a legal intake, reception, and client support service. They answer phone calls, they answer messages in real time, they schedule appointments, and basically Lex Reception provides immigration law firms with 24/7 legal answering services, so that you as a law firm don't have to worry about kind of missing inquiries from prospective clients or missing calls from existing clients, etc. If you'd like, Lex Reception also can proactively reach out to folks. So if someone fills out a form on your website and says they'd like, legal services or would like to talk to you, Lex Reception staff, your team there, can actually reach out to them as like the first point of contact. And they also integrate with a bunch of tools like Clio, Practice Panther, LawPay, and others, so they can really fit in nicely into your tech stack. So for folks who listen to the show, Lex Reception offers $250 off your first month of service with them. So please check them out. There's a link in the show notes, or just, reach out to them and say that you heard about Lex Reception from the GMI Rocket Show. Cool. Okay. So without further ado, really excited for this conversation. Jared, Lory, thank you both so much for being here. And I'm excited to learn more about Access 61 and, of course, dive into your stories.
Great to be here.
Hi, Roman. Great to see you.
So, okay. So for those who are listening and maybe who are longtime listeners, Jared, you were actually one of my very first guests when we first started this show. It's probably 2.5 years ago now, or maybe even more. So I do recommend for anyone who's listening, please go back and listen to that episode. We talked about how you started your first tech company, YoTengoBot, which was an bilingual AI chatbot, super ahead of its time, way before ChatGPT was like all over the news, etc. So for folks listening, please go, do check out that episode. But I thought maybe, Jared, we'd start with you. We won't dig into all of your background, just because, again, we've had this discussion, and for folks can hear really the depth of your story back then. But can you just go through a little bit, sort of, how did you get to where you are today? You were a defender, a public defender for some time. You're based in Maryland. Just can you talk through a little bit of those high points, just so folks can understand kind of what are your motivations to be doing the thing that you're doing now for humanitarian immigration cases?
Yeah. I always kind of say that the way that I got into immigration is very similar to, if somebody had a restaurant and every person that came in asked for a cheeseburger and you didn't have that on the menu, at some point it might kind of come into your head, maybe I should sell cheeseburgers at this restaurant. That's how I got into immigration. For those that don't know it, I was in the Peace Corps in El Salvador after college and before I went to law school. And like you said, I was a public defender, and then I was a private criminal defense attorney, and I had my own law firm. And most of my clients were Spanish speaking, and they would constantly talk to me about their immigration cases. And then they would also, after good experiences with me, want to bring me their family members and friends and have me talk to them about their immigration cases. And after a while, my partners were pushing me, please start doing immigration. There's so much business there. So that's really that was what led me into immigration in the first place, was really customer demand for this vertical.
And so I know you eventually branched off on your own. You started your law firm, Jaskot.Law, also Jaskot.Abogado, because you do speak Spanish, and you do work with a lot of Spanish speaking clients. Can you share a little bit about sort of, how has that journey kind of been for you, right? I mean, starting your own practice, but you're here, you're a second time guest on an immigration tech show. So I would argue that you're not the typical kind of, attorney that started off on his own and kind of built their practice. So I don't know, can you share a little bit about your relationship with technology? Like, why has that been central, or how has that been central to you as you've built your practice over the years?
Yeah, I come from a long line of entrepreneurs in my family, none of whom were lawyers. In fact, when I went to law school, I really didn't have that great an idea about what lawyers do on a daily basis. And I hadn't met or spoken with too many lawyers through my life. And so I think that lens of business and small business and entrepreneurialism is more of a guiding force in my life than being a lawyer, in a way. And so as I have approached the law as a business person, that entrepreneurial drive is really what led me to technology in order to do a better job running my law firm, in terms of serving clients, bringing down the price of services, being more organized, improving my efficiency. That's really what led me to tech, is trying to figure out how to do a better job at my law firm.
And have never been you've never shied away from investing in technology and experimenting with it as well. So I appreciate, I appreciate that about you. I think as somebody who not only does the job, but also leads the way. I know you speak on a lot of panels about technology, particularly about AI. I know we're doing this live before the AILA annual conference, and I believe you're a panelist, right, for at least one session, and you're going to be talking about AI prompting, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really, I mean, the current trend in AI and what it can do for law firms is mind-boggling in terms of how quickly it's getting better and how much it can do and how much it can do for immigration lawyers. Yesterday, I was giving a CLE to the Massachusetts bar for how to use AI in trial practice. And one of the other speakers talked about a prompt that you can have the AI act as the prosecutor cross-examining your client and role play with them. And then you could create that prompt and send your client home with it, and they can get cross-examined over and over again. And there's about to be a new release in OpenAI's that it can talk. And so you could send your client home with a prosecutor to literally cross-examine them. And you can also use it to write a cross that you do. And it's really good at it. And prior to that, I mean, literally, we're talking about a month ago, before I found out about this and before these capabilities, only I could do cross-examination of the lawyers in my law firm because I was the only one that knew how. Now, if I can get that into a prompt, this skill set that literally took me probably 4 years to be good at, I can transfer over to other lawyers and they can be off and running. And that is just incredible and exciting.
And so I guess on that point, Lory, I want to turn to you in just a minute, but Jared, I think the way that you're talking about this it sounds really positive, and you're seeing a lot of opportunities. You're seeing this as a growth potential for your firm. I imagine a lot of other attorneys, perhaps most, saying, hold on a second, this thing can do something that took me 4 years to learn, and it can do it immediately. They would see that as a risk. So just because we're on this topic now, I mean, I would probably bring this up later on in the episode, but just because we're talking about this now, how do you look at it that way? Like, how do you remain positive, when you literally are watching in almost real time AI become so good that it can now cross-examine your clients in a way that only you could at your firm just a month ago or whatnot?
Well, I suppose that what I want to see in the world is not job security for me to keep doing the exact same thing that I'm doing before that other people can't do. What I want to see is more people win their immigration case by being well prepared for cross-examination. And the only way that we're going to achieve that is to have more people be able to do a good cross-examination preparation, which this obviously helps achieve. And then secondarily, how can we do that cheaper? Because a lot of people can't afford to pay Jared to prep them for their cross-examination. And so, to see all these folks succeed in their case is what I want to see in the world, not my job security to keep doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, that's fair. And I would just, add to that the reason I imagine that someone like you would feel comfortable with it is because you know that once you watch things shift, you will morph your firm or your practice, the services you provide, to kind of take into account what is coming up or what is here now, the most modern thing. And I think a lot of folks are very slow to change. And so when technology like this does, they come to, they face it, they don't know how to shift their practice. And so it worries them. So I think it's just, there are a lot of lessons there kind of early on in this discussion around sort of, embracing technology, first of all, second of all, checking out the trends and seeing what's coming down the pike. And then third of all, rather than spending emotional energy on, being upset about it, instead put that energy into thinking about how you can morph your firm to take advantage of this new technology rather than kind of fight it or be scared of it. So I love that. All right, Jared, we'll come back to you. I want to pause this for a second. Lori, I do want to turn to you as sort of a first-time guest, if you will, on the show. So you have an amazing career. You're the first person, I believe, who is a judge that's been on my show, which is, wonderful. You don't think about, okay, a former immigration judge becoming somebody who's key to building kind of an up and coming technology platform. So I'd love to, kind of go back, Lori, to your, sort of background and really talk a little bit about your career, your law school experience, what got you into immigration, et cetera, et cetera. So I know you're living in South Carolina now. I believe you're originally from Chicago, North Carolina. Sorry, apologies. But you're originally from Chicago. Is that right?
That's right.
So, when you were younger, did you always want to be a lawyer? I mean, is it run in the family, et cetera? How did you come to this? Because being a judge is the pinnacle. How did you come to this from kind of your earlier life?
Okay. Well, actually, I guess you could say it does run in my family, but I think when I was younger, my aspirations were more in drama and theater. And that's what I was really the most aspiring to. But it so happens that my grandmother was a lawyer. And my grandmother fled the Tsar in Russia with her family when she was about 9 years old and came to the United States and was basically uneducated. But when my mother was old enough to go to teachers college and not be at home, my grandmother got a GED, put herself through law school at DePaul Law School in Chicago, and became an attorney.
Wow.
So I used to accompany her to her office and would open envelopes for her when I was very young. And in them would be a $5 bill from one of her clients. She had, very poor and working class clients. And it really exemplified to me what lawyering was all about. Then fast forward to the 60s and Vietnam War days, and I wanted to do something when I got out of college, but I needed to do something that I thought could help me earn an income. And I thought if I went to law school, that I would be able to help people achieve justice for themselves in a way that was just a little bit more practical than protesting for it all the time, which is what I had been engaged in. So I went to Northeastern Law School in Boston, which is kind of a work study school. And I had all these fantastic experiences, including working for the Prisoners' Rights Project out of Boston and working for the United Farm Workers and so on. So I was really able to see how, using the law, we were able to achieve change for people that really impacted their lives. And that's why I went to law school and why I became a lawyer. At that time, there was really no immigration law course. There were no immigration law clinics. And I only learned about it. I thought I was actually going to be a women's rights lawyer and be sort of a civil rights lawyer. But my first client was a Haitian refugee who had been came in from Haiti and was sent to El Paso, Texas, where with other Haitians, where nobody spoke French or French Creole, and they could not communicate with these detainees. And one of them attempted to take his life, and so the authorities sort of freaked out and said, "We'll let anybody out who has a relative they can go stay with." And this client had an uncle in Boston. So I sort of learned immigration law over the weekend, reading through 8 U.S. code to try to figure out the statute. And I ended up representing this gentleman, and we won his case, which was really terrific and not at all typical of how Haitians have been treated in the United States, by the way. It was just that at that time, it was before the 1980 Refugee Act was adopted and put into law by Congress. So there was really no procedure and no way to understand how to deal with somebody in this situation. And I think he got the benefit of inexperienced officials at the Immigration and Nationality Service. So, I mean, it was just all chance, and I really liked it. And the thing about it is, I was in law school, I loved criminal procedure, and I loved criminal law, actually. And I remember my ignorance, actually, and I was going around saying, well, I like doing immigration because they're not criminals. They haven't done anything wrong. They're basically innocent. And of course, there are a lot of people on the right who wouldn't agree with me, but I still believe that.
And so I'm curious, actually, just a quick question. What kind of law did your grandmother practice?
My grandmother did a lot of tenant law and some estate law, a lot of workers' comp type law. You know, she didn't do immigration, but she did basically. She actually represented a couple of unions, and specifically represented the Furriers Union in Chicago, and basically a lot of left-leaning organizations.
That's so really cool.
Was a tradition that I tried to continue.
And I imagine at the time she was probably one of, not many female attorneys, especially.
Well, what's really amazing is that there was a period of time in the 40s and early 50s when there were women attorneys. There was a huge break after that in the 50s when women were sort of forced back into the household and supposed to be wives and Donna Reed type individuals. But my grandmother was right at that moment where there were actually a number of African American women attorneys, as well as a few. There were not a lot, but much more than were apparent in the 50s and 60s. When I went to law school, I went to law school between 1973 and 1976. And when I went to law school, the first law school I went to had just become co-ed, and there were no women's bathrooms. There were just men. I mean, there were bathrooms that were assigned to the women students. There were only 5 women in my class. This was at New England School of Law in Boston at first. And we walked into men's bathrooms to use the bathroom.
Wow. That's crazy. What a different time.
It's come a long way since then. I think
certainly.
There are now more women enrolled in law school than there are men.
Wow. That's amazing. So yeah, I just was curious to know kind of what exposure you had when your grandmother was practicing, and so you kind of went through this. You accidentally stumbled upon immigration as a lot of folks do. Jared, you did as well. I kind of did too. I entered law school. I'm from New York City. My undergraduate degree was one of my degrees was in financial economics. I wanted to do some kind of a corporate, lawyer type job. And my first job was at a big immigration firm that does corporate immigration. And I thought, yeah, this is close enough. Right. And then I sort of learned about immigration, really fell in love with it. And it connected me to my own family's immigration roots, which, we never really talked about. Lori, I don't know if this is how your grandmother was, but a lot of immigrants, they come here and then they just look forward. They don't really look back, even if it's something that in hindsight does kind of connect their kids or grandkids, et cetera, to their roots. Immigrants don't, we're thinking forward. We want to build something here. We're not kind of reminiscing on the past. So it forced me to do that, which I'm really, really grateful for. So okay, Lori, so you went to law school, you started, started practicing various types of case law, criminal, et cetera. And then you stumbled upon this Haitian client. It really turned you on to what was I should say, growing immigration practice.
Yes.
I would love to, but for purposes of keeping this not 2.5-hour conversation, but I would have loved to. Can you talk a little bit about the various parts of your career, right? Because you did practice law, but then you worked at various nonprofit organizations. You worked on the policy side, right? You were a judge. You had such a varied perspective or experience as an immigration practitioner. Can you just talk a little bit about, what are some of the things you learned, for example, moving away from being a practitioner and going into being a judge?
Roman,
Let's start there.
If I could just interject really quickly.
Yeah, please.
There is one part of Lori's career in the very early going that I think is quite interesting to others, is that, and it's sort of the hippy dippy times that she was in, is that when she graduated, she didn't join a law firm. She joined a law co-op, one of the members of which was the first president of ALA, Warren Leiden of Barry, Appleman and Leiden. And I just thought you might want to know about that little tidbit, see if she would give us a little of that.
Well, there was actually, let me just make it a little more accurate, Jared. Warren in Boston, in the Boston, Cambridge area at that time, like in the late 70s to early 80s, there were a number of individuals who were members of the National Lawyers Guild, which I also was. And many of us got together in what we called law collectives. And the idea of these collectives was that in many of the collectives, we shared all of the office responsibilities. Like some of the lawyers would have time in the afternoon where they were answering phones and being at the reception desk. We did our own typing. We did typing for other people. There were no computers then, of course. And actually, I was in one law collective. Warren was in a different law collective, but it was all at the same time. So, yeah. It was really a good time. We really felt like we were making a difference. And, I have to contrast that with what's happening nowadays, because at that time, the whole mood was that the Supreme Court and other courts were helping us gain rights, not lose them. And so the changes that were happening, we kept acquiring new latitude, new ability for people to marry somebody they loved, to live where they wanted to live, to have different kinds of freedom, and of course, women to have control over their bodies and their health care. And I just assumed, probably mistakenly, that things were going to continue that way. And I remember I was watching Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC several months ago when he said that he too had never thought that there was going to be a time when we were going to be back backtracking, technologically moving forward, but in terms of content and substance, backtracking on people's rights. And so it hasn't really made me change my commitment at all. And if anything, it's deepened it. One of the first things that I did was I was a co-founder of a refugee law center in Cambridge called Centro Presente, which was principally for Salvadoran and Guatemalan refugees. And so I developed an attorney program where we could get attorneys in law firms to take pro bono cases, to represent these individuals in immigration court. And really, if I look back, I'm not doing anything that's a whole lot different than that now. And I feel really proud of that. When I was appointed to be a judge by Janet Reno, who was then the Attorney General, it was in 1995, I had no idea. I had never had any interest in working for the government, because in immigration law, the government is your opponent. And I'm squarely on the side of the non-citizen. And so it never occurred to me that I would be anything but a neutral arbiter in the government as a judge. But I quickly found out that enforcement is really the name of the game in all of the government agencies. I think this is true. And it's really difficult. You have to push really hard to make a change. And there's congressional oversight. And congressional oversight is tied to money and funding. And no one, when I went to the Board of Immigration Appeals, which is where I was hired to be a judge, an appellate judge, the fear was that if we did anything too extreme, we'd be called before Congress and we'd have to account for what we were doing. So nobody wanted to ruffle the waters. It was very, very conservative. And I refused to give up my perspective or my views. And I very quickly became one of a couple dissenters on the Board of Immigration Appeals. And I kind of became known for that. And my dissents still exist. I mean, you can read them in the books of opinions of the decisions of the Board of Immigration Appeals. I was not too welcomed by my colleagues for doing that, but I really felt I had to. And one of the people that really, it was very difficult. I mean, the transition to being a judge and more working within the government for me was very hard. Some nights I went home crying. I stayed at work until 11 o'clock. One thing I will tell you about Warren Leiden that's really funny, when I left to be a judge, Warren was still working at AILA, and I was working at the AILA Foundation, and he called me into his office, and he said, well, what do you think you're going to do? Are you going to write law review articles, or are you going to just go to the gym, like a lot of people at the Board of Immigration Appeals do? You know, are you just going to take it easy now? You won't be working so hard. Nothing was further from the truth. I worked 10, 11, 12-hour days. I would stay up at home writing dissents until 2 o'clock in the morning. Wow. No staff person. I had no clerk. No staff person was assigned to help me. And no staff person wanted to help me because they were basically, their productivity influenced whether they would get kudos from their colleagues, whether they would get an extra day off or some other kind of compensation for productivity. Because as you know, when I was there, we had a backlog. It wasn't a million plus backlog like it exists now. But anyway, I had to write 3 million backlog. But I had to write very quickly to get out my dissents if I wanted to be heard. And my feeling very strongly at the time was, if I get these dissents out, then it's up to the attorneys and the practitioners in the field to do something with it, to take it to the Circuit Court of Appeals. Otherwise, I wasn't just writing to take a position. I was really hoping that we could bring about some change.
Mm.
I think, we did. I had a very good chairman, Paul Schmidt, who I worked under at the time, and he was very supportive, and he often joined me in these dissenting opinions. But unfortunately, that all came to an end when John Ashcroft was appointed Attorney General in the second Bush administration. And there was literally what was called a liberal purge at the board, and about 5 or 6 of us out of 18 to 22 appellate judges were either transferred, detailed to some other less visible place to work, and I left because I just felt like if I couldn't make a difference, that was the whole reason I was there. I didn't want to be. So, I mean, that's a great transition actually into what we're doing now, what Jared and I are doing, because that's been my whole goal all along, is to make a difference and to have a real positive impact. And when I met Jared and heard about what he's been working on, I was just enchanted, I guess I can say. And I just wanted to learn more. And so to me, even though I was a judge, sometimes an attorney, sometimes, there was a consistency in my mission, if you want to call it that, or my goals, which was to really serve immigrants and refugees and to make a difference in the way society as a whole saw their presence in our society, at least in legal terms.
I thank you for sharing that, because it's so inspiring. And I think it's really, this is why I love going back into sort of my guests' careers, because you really see the through line, right? I mean, from what you were seeing and thinking, working with your grandma, to what you ended up doing as a practitioner, and then to how seriously you took your responsibility as a BIA judge, but, not, but holding on to your truths and your beliefs and sort of your mission in life. When I was in law school, I did an internship with the U.S. Attorney's Office at the Eastern District in New York, under Assistant U.S. Attorney Dunn, and it was the same thing. I felt, I had already done a couple internships. I already sort of was in the immigration space, if you will, I was like, I thought to myself, I'm going to the other side, kind of like you mentioned, the government is and I was an intern, so I didn't have years of experience feeling this quote unquote other side, but that's what I had. And one of the things that I learned in the internship was that, at least from the context of the U.S. Attorney's Office, that's where there was the most authority. That's where decisions could actually be made. And so, the team that was working there, they could look at a client's case, and if they decide that the client is, an upstanding, whatever the case may be, and that, the removal order should be dismissed, they were the only ones really kind of that had the power to do that, or at least they were one of the few, right? They could drop the case. And that was a really big learning opportunity for me. And it was eye-opening to say, okay, right, of course, folks on the government side aren't, anti-immigrant or whatever. Sure, there are folks like that. There's all sorts of people everywhere, but there really was a big opportunity to make a change. So I love that you shared that, and I really appreciate it. And I think many people do, that you took that position. As you were sharing the story, we've got a ton of comments. I just wanted to share a couple of them to show some of the excitement for the episode. We had Matt Gale, who said he's really stoked for this conversation. Gabby mentioned that not only is this an excellent discussion, but a really great point around access to justice. I think, in terms of refugee rights. And we have Dr. Alicia Trish, who said that you wrote Immigration, Law, and Crimes. Lory, is this a textbook that you co-authored?
Yeah, it's like a treatise. Okay. It's available for purchase. actually put out by the National Immigration Project of the National Lawyers Guild.
Got it.
And it still exists and it's still updated. It really came out originally in, I think, 1984. And we've been updating it ever since. I've sort of backed off of that, but year after year, there's been so many changes. We've had an update editor working on it. So it's still up to date and good law, and people should get it. It's really a very helpful book.
Immigration Law and Crimes. Check it out. And then Dr. Trish also said that they called you the Justice Brennan of the BIA, which I love. And I mean, with your dissents, I think that's really powerful. And then the last comment I want to show was Chase Hurdle, who has been in the immigration technology space and previously worked for the American Bar Association. Said, for better or worse, enforcement is always tied to resources. So, I think it's good. It's important to know that, right? It's important to know that there are, incentives that aren't maybe obvious, right? If you're just reading a decision or watching the news, et cetera. So I want to, before we transition back to you, Jared, and to talk a little bit about how Access 61 came up, I just want to take a quick pause and give a thank you to DocketWise, the second sponsor for this episode. For those folks who are watching or listening to this, if you don't know DocketWise, DocketWise is an all-in-one immigration case management platform. They have best-in-class forms. They have really customizable questionnaires, what a lot of folks love about them. They make it really easy for clients to share their information, have that information pre-populate forms and things like that. They have really great integrations. They were the first to have an open API, as far as I know, in the immigration space. They integrate with my company, Laborless, so I love that. Another thing I really love about DocketWise and why I'm excited that they are a sponsor of the show is they just have a ton of content. They have actually a recent podcast that they started, which is great. They have a great blog. They have ebooks. They do so much for the industry, not just by way of providing technology, but also education, et cetera. They've sponsored this show. They've sponsored other things I've done for the industry. So I appreciate them. So if you're listening to this, check out DocketWise. There's a link in the show notes, or just reach out to them if you're not a user. And if you're interested, tell them you heard about them from the GMI Rocket show. So wanted to give that quick shout out. So Jared, back to you.
Wait.
Go ahead.
I just want to note that my law firm has been a DocketWise customer for 5 years, and DocketWise is the first app that Access 61 got to execute our legal work. So little extra sauce for DocketWise there. I'm paying DocketWise, just to be clear. I am not a paid. DocketWise is not a paid sponsor of Access 61, but we do use it and I love it. So
yeah, and I think that just goes to show, right, that they're not afraid to try new things within the industry. And again, they took a chance on sponsoring the show, and I'm grateful for it. So thanks for that, Jared. So back to you, Jared. I want to talk about Access 61, the concept of, there are a couple of things at play. Number one, artificial intelligence, right? Using software to assist with drafting or whatever it might be. Another thing at play here is this concept of limited scope representation, which is a fairly new idea. And then, of course, the third thing is access to justice for individuals who are seeking, to apply for, to put in an asylum application in the U.S., and sort of the barriers that exist there and what you're trying to solve. So can we talk a little bit about those three, aspects? And Lory, please jump in as well. I'm just starting with Jared here. I think maybe let's start with the idea of limited scope representation. And that ties into the name Access 61. Can you talk a little bit about what that is, when it started and sort of how that shaped this idea for you?
So limited scope representation is an idea that I think has been floating around in the law since at least the 90s. But it's, the law, as you noted earlier, Roman, the law is slow, it's conservative. And I think we've been slow to adopt limited scope representation. And then in the context of immigration court, limited scope representation has not been legal for private practitioners until there was a change made that went into effect in November of 2022. So Prior to that, it was only nonprofits that could engage in limited scope representation. So this, we're not even 2 years out from this change that was made by the courts. What is it? It very clearly is that prior to the rule change, full scope representation, the only option is the following. When you as a lawyer enter your appearance on behalf of an immigrant in immigration court, you are entered in that case for its duration unless the court releases you from the case. So you got to represent that person from initial preliminary motions like, change of venue from one court to another, their initial pleadings, master calendar hearings, all the way through to the end of their individual hearing. So because we know that immigration court cases often last 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, when you enter your appearance on behalf of an immigrant, you are saying, I am committed to representing this person for 8 years and doing everything for them. So when you have to commit yourself as an attorney to such a long engagement with so much work, you obviously need to insist upon a large contract with a large retainer. And that was really a huge piece of friction for most asylum seekers, many of which just wanted to file their asylum application, that first document. But as an attorney, we couldn't do that for them without getting them to sign the whole retainer. Now, limited scope representation comes in, and what it says is, you attorneys, you can contract with these folks for each individual piece of their case. You can limit the scope of your representation to specific filings. In the context of immigration court, you cannot make a limited scope appearance. So this is only pleadings on paper. You cannot actually represent someone in court, but there's a large percentage of what's done is paper. So that's a limitation, but it's not a game ender. And so that small change is really what made this company possible. Now, the form that the court published to enter your limited scope representation is called the E61. The full scope representation, the E28, the E61, and that is where we got our name.
I love that. And I think it's great, to your point, when just to add a little flavor, color to it, when folks do make that initial application for asylum, they can then apply for EAD, right? Employment authorization. And I think that's a big, and then of course, on the flip side of it, the asylum process takes a very long time. It takes a while to get the master calendar hearing, and then, all the whole thing. And when folks feel, this is what I'm gathering from you, when potential applicants feel that it's all or nothing, they have to sort of have a ton of money up front. They have to really commit themselves to this entire process. It may, scare them or just impede them in some way, and then they don't do it at all. And so I guess what you're saying is that if lawyers, are able to help them at the very least with those initial first steps, first of all, it gets them in, right? Within that 1 year deadline, for example, it gets them in. And then secondarily, they can then apply for an employment authorization document, work in the U.S. lawfully, which is really the whole point of what we do as immigration professionals. We want people to have lawful status in the U.S. We want to do it in a way that, is obviously accepted by the government. And then they can make money to pay for the rest of it, right? And live their lives and not worry about being, working. Let's be honest. We all know people work under the table. It happens, but we want to diminish the occurrence and help people get lawful employment status. So I love that. All right. So that's number one. And I guess the second part is for you as a technology entrepreneur and somebody who's a leader in this tech space, especially around AI. What are your thoughts about how AI can help with this? Because this is not just a second service that you're providing, right? This is sort of a tech-enabled service. So can you talk a little bit about how artificial intelligence plays a role in this?
Yeah. So one of the challenge that we're trying to adopt here is to create a service that for an affordable price, super fast, gives people consistently high quality products, because one of the things that people have traditionally done when confronted with the high price retainer from an immigration attorney at that moment we were just speaking about is that they'll do it themselves, or they'll go to a notario, which is a sort of back alley lawyer, if you will. And they'll make mistakes in that first document that are ultimately fatal to their asylum case in immigration court. And so for us, how can we have that high quality product that will allow them to win their immigration case and make it affordable and reasonably priced? And so for us, what that comes down to is that Lory and I spent a huge amount of time coming up with our playbook for how to do an asylum application really well and really fast. And our goal is to train dozens and, hopefully in the future, hundreds of attorneys with that playbook so that they can execute that playbook for asylum seekers in their cases. Now, we want to ensure that the attorneys are using our playbook and that the quality of their work is the absolute best. And one of the ways that we're doing that is that we are using AI to check their work, and we're having them use AI to check their work. So they do the work, and then they feed their work into generative AI, and the generative AI actually critiques them using Lory and I's playbook. So Lory and I get to clone ourselves with this. And we also, what we get from that AI playbook critic is we get something that we can constantly improve so that it does the same thing over and over again. But that as we make that thing better every time, it scales across the entire organization. And so, I think there's not many Lorys in this world. I think it's quite obvious to all. But there can be many, many, many AIs that know what Lory knows and execute her ideas consistently and excellently. And so that's step one of how we're using AI to achieve our goals of fast, high quality, and affordable.
I want to emphasize, if I can, Roman, I just want to emphasize something here, which is how critical it is that these applications be filed within the first year that the individual asylum seeker is here in the United States. Because what happens, asylum, assuming that you can win your case, asylum is really the only form of durable protection. There are other forms. There's something called withholding of removal. And if you're late, if you've not filed within 1 year, but you're still going to be persecuted or even tortured if you return to your country, it is possible to win that kind of protection. But it doesn't prevent the US government from removing you to any other country that will accept you and will not persecute or torture you. And you can't bring your family here. Asylum, on the other hand, if you get in within that first year, is something that ultimately can even lead to citizenship. So it's so important to take advantage of that law. And I see more and more, a lot of people do not. They're afraid to come forward, or they don't have the money to come forward, or they go to somebody who gives them poor advice. And so the benefit of Access 61 is truly to give them access. And it's something that we can use the AI to assist with and make it really possible for them to present as close to a winning case as they're ever going to be able to make.
I love that. I mean, that's such a concise way of putting it. And I think it centers the concept of access. I mean, you're right, access to justice, and also access to information for them to know that they do have to do this within the 1 year deadline in order to kind of, do it as easily as possible, not have to go through withholding of removal process, et cetera, and to make it affordable and quick. is phenomenal. I mean, I can imagine a lot of people saying, "Uh-oh, my 1 year expires in a week," right? And without AI, it's just harder to get everything done. But using technology, it can speed up a really important process.
Right.
I wanted to share a comment here by Chase. Chase mentioned with regards to limited scope representation that multiple states have allowed for limited scope representation for quite a while. It's unfortunate that EOIR doesn't make changes to allow for it and didn't make changes until 2022. But I will say that at least we did, right? At least we got there in 2022 to allow for limited scope representation. So Chase asks here, where does Access 61 fall in EOIR's definition of practice versus preparation of a case? If you have any thoughts on that.
I'm curious if is the question trying to differentiate that for purposes of who has to be a lawyer or a licensed attorney to do it? Is that what you're looking for, Chase?
We'll give Chase a minute to respond to your question.
On that front, though, Roman, I will say I think one of the things that is sort of surprising potentially even to the attorneys that are working with us in Access 61 is that one of the things that Lory and I deeply believe in is that the attorney needs to fill out with the client the entire asylum application is done by an attorney. And the standard in the practice is actually that a paralegal does a massive amount of the biographic information, and then the attorney comes in, and we're actually kind of turning that on its head, and we are having the attorney do the entire application. And so, sure, we are using AI. We are focused on price and velocity, but we are laser focused so much so on quality of this asylum application that we want to have a lawyer execute every part of it.
Because we're looking ahead. We're like we're not just taking the completion of an I-589 as a separate, one-off part of seeking asylum. We're looking ahead to imagine how will that be used later when the person is in front of a judge, when they go to their merits hearing, which is like a trial where they're going to ask for asylum. And so it's critical to have some kind of consistency and harmony with the things that may come up later in the case, whether it is cross-examination or direct examination or providing a sworn statement, more detail, or documentation, etc. And so what we're really asking our attorneys to do is to think ahead, even though we're not articulating all of that necessarily in the I-589. We're saying you're going to use your attorney skills to think ahead and to be aware and look out for the pitfalls that can arise later. So that's, and if I may, I just wanted to say something. Jared, the thing that you talked about earlier about the AI's ability to be a prosecutor is something that is going to be so important to us, because one of the things, since under the Access or the E61 representation, we will not be going to court with that person for their master calendar hearing. They're going to go on their own. But what we're going to offer them as sort of an adjunct to the completion of the form is kind of a coaching or training in how to appear on your own pro se in front of an immigration judge. And so the cross-examination function that the prosecutor would be doing in the AI, I think we may be able to adapt that perfectly to people so that individuals can feel more confident going into court on their own and representing themselves and being prepared to respond to questions from the judge or from the government attorney.
Do you find that, or I should say from that perspective, if they say at that point, I do want you to come with me and represent me at court, that would just be a second engagement separate from that initial one. Is that right? Or are you saying that it wouldn't be even possible for them to do that?
We will go to court with them for their individual hearing, meaning
Right.
their final hearing, if they engage us for that, or we will connect them with a law firm that will help them do full scope representation after they file their 589 and meet that 1-year deadline and get that work permit and preserve their rights. Either of those paths are available. We will represent them in trial, but we're not going to enter our appearance until near the trial date for that full scope representation, because we're trying to avoid those long engagements that end up lifting cost and making representation, unfeasible for so many people. And so, as Lory said, one of the key components to this is that our customers have to be intrepid. They have to be resourceful. They have to be willing to learn, and they have to be willing to represent themselves in court at their master calendar hearing. And they have to be on their dates and stay up to their case, because one of the ways that we're getting costs out of the case is by putting that all back on their plate. Now, lucky for us, most asylum seekers are intrepid. Most are resourceful, and most are willing to do a lot, because their asylum case just represents a small portion of their life. And in all those other places in their life, they're already doing all of that, because they already made it here and they're already making it here.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you, what do you think the likelihood is that these types of clients will be, we'll go through with it? But your point is very high. It's very likely.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see why you would. To me, I think we'll see, right? Of course, we haven't, we just launched this company. We've been doing limited scope applications in Jaskot.Law for over a year. So you could kind of say that we incubated Access 61 inside Jaskot.Law. And so we've already got experience with these applications. We've already seen how they work, seen how people like them, what does and doesn't work. And I believe that now, as we launch Access 61 and only offer this product, hopefully there's also going to be a little self-selection, Roman, right? That people that are resourceful, are intrepid, will reach out to us because this product calls out to them. And then, of course, for those people who want a full service attorney, who want that full scope representation, our service is not appropriate for them. And that's okay.
Yeah. A question that I have that actually Chase also had at the same time. Can you talk a little bit about, within Access 61, what are your thoughts about what will the tech be doing versus what will the human attorney be doing, behind each asylum application or other service that Access 61 provides?
Yeah. So generally speaking, my philosophy with tech in law firms is we first work on the process with humans. So, let's put it on paper even and think about what's step one, what's step two, what does each step comprise of, and let's execute it as humans and figure out what we like and don't like and what's taking us a lot of time. And then from there, we start to look at what are the things that are taking us the most time that we think can be automated. And so we then select for time reduction and really appropriateness for automation, because, right, there's some things tech's good at, some things tech is not good at. In this case, there are certain aspects of the intake that we're having the tech do, and then having the humans check. And then we are having the tech review the narrative components that the attorneys are creating. So right now, the amount of tech, I would say, is not so high. I think that we're being very innovative in the way that we're checking the attorneys' work with the tech. I don't think very many practitioners that I've heard of have used it in that way to check work. and to train attorneys. As Lory said, I think an IJ bot that they can practice with is really a great example of a way that we might be able to provide clients with a neat experience for a very low cost. One thing the tech is not doing is filling out the application preliminarily or doing all the intake. And the reason for that, I think, it has to do with the way that users interact with AI and intake. And I do it too. So I'm not judging, but I think sometimes when you're answering boring questions, you kind of just go, yes, 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 no, no, no. And you're just going down. And we don't want people to do that. We want them to think about each question very, very hard with an attorney explaining the stakes of it. Because answering these questions yes or no and making sure that you're answering accurately, even your past addresses, your family, people have lost, many people have lost their asylum case in court as a result of the way that they filled out those forms. And so we want to make sure that those forms are filled out in a way that will be the foundation for a winning case, which is why we don't have the tech fill out that part of the form. We have a lawyer do it.
I think that's really brilliant because I think, given how immigration and a lot of technology has progressed over the years, the first, the lower hanging fruit, if you will, is a form that a user fills out with whatever it might be, biographic data, et cetera. And then that fills out some preset fields on a document. But I love that you looked at that and you said, yes, but there's a psychological aspect to this process, especially in the context of an asylum case, and that isn't knowable by AI because it can't look at it doesn't know if you're missing an address that you've lived in or you've forgotten your sibling or whatever, but it can be fatal. So I love that you've turned it around and said, you know what, we're going to actually, the thing that everyone else does with tech, we're actually going to go back old school, if you will, right, and do it personally, with a human, but not because we're trying to be inefficient, but actually because we're trying to avoid a problem that cannot possibly be solved if that form is filled out by a bot, if you will. So I love that. That's such a great lesson, right? It's a great lesson of, don't just mindlessly go with where tech has always been. It makes sense actually to go back to absolute basics and say, okay, what does make sense? What doesn't make sense? And bring in the psychological aspect to it.
It's funny. I was talking to an attorney in my firm about this, and he actually got a little probably excited in the way that a lot of attorneys do when they're worried about, bots replacing them. And I said to him that I thought that the brief writing was actually a lot lower hanging fruit for us to automate. And I think that going along with your sort of this intake and form filling is easy. A bot can do that, but only a human can craft a brief. It's probably the opposite of the way that we're going to end up attacking this. So it's funny how these things are coming around, and we'll see if that is what bears out. But at the end of the day, we really do believe that lawyers add a ton of value to immigrants' cases. And we believe that human to human interaction has great worth. And we want to make sure that we're pushing that button in the moments that matters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. So Lory, I wanted to turn to you for a little bit just to kind of go through this third prong of my questioning, which is around access to justice. I mean, we've kind of touched on this, but I do think that this goes to what you've shared, the core of what you've always done. And honestly, what Jared's also always done with the firm and with his previous company, YoTengoBot. But can you talk a little bit about, Lory, about how, you're obviously, you have a storied career. There's probably a million things you could be doing with your time right now. You mentioned you were sort of enchanted by this idea. Can you talk a little bit about what your thoughts are around how Access 61, is and will move towards this concept of access to justice, in a real way, right? Not just lip service, but in a real way.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, like I said before, assuming that the word gets around, we will have the potential to eliminate people's missing their 1-year deadline. And that's not all. One thing that I've heard recently, which is really disconcerting, is that there have been cases where, because an asylum seeker was unable to get an attorney in time, when you go to court, I'm sure you know this, Roman, when you go before the immigration judge and you don't have a lawyer, the judge will ask you, do you want time to get a lawyer? And usually the person will say yes. When they're back in front of the judge for the third time, the judge is getting pretty impatient, and the judge's pending cases are piling up. So he or she really wants to move things along. And oftentimes, usually because of language difficulties, but also because asylum and all immigration law is so complex. It's very, I think we can explain it to people, but without that explanation, it's pretty unknowable. And so when someone hasn't been able to come up with the money to get an attorney, or they can't find an attorney willing to take the amount of money they can offer them, they will keep looking, or they may even give up. And when they go back to court and they say to the judge, I haven't been able to find an attorney yet, many of the judges are saying, okay, I'm going to go forward with your case at this next date. And when they come in on the next date and say, Judge, maybe I found someone, but he couldn't come to court today, or I haven't found anybody yet, but I have 2 more people I have to talk to, the judge has gone, I'm sorry, sir, madam, but I'm going to enter, if there's nothing further, I'm going to treat your asylum application as abandoned, and I am going to enter an order of removal. And I've really been appalled to see cases where that kind of thing has happened, only because there was no access to affordable counsel. So that's something that I really think that we can make a big dent in and try to prevent that kind of injustice from happening. I mean, there are certain problems that exist with detained asylum seekers where there are language issues that I've also heard about that are just, the government isn't going to provide their attorney to help fill out the form. The judge isn't going to help fill out the form. How does that 589 form get filled out without us? And without a lot of lawyers like Jared envisions being able to take this on and doing it. So that's, pretty basic, is just being able to file the darn thing. So there's that. And then I also think that we are envisioning not just stopping at the end of phase 1, as we're calling it, but that we are thinking ahead. Like I said before, as we're working on phase 1, we're thinking ahead to what other kind of preparation and representation will be necessary. And that if we have someone who gets a work permit, who's able to get a decent paying job, support themselves and their family, they can afford an attorney. Years go by before we get to the actual trial. Oftentimes it's set 2 years out, 3 years out, and then with continuances, and I guess part of this was due to COVID, but we've seen these dates get extended for years. And in that kind of time, people can put down some roots and accumulate the kind of resources necessary to hire a lawyer, either a full-time lawyer if they choose, or to come back to us for phases 2, 3, and 4. Yeah. And I'm real hopeful that we'll be able to do that, but we'll be able to do it in a way that's comfortable for the asylum seeker as well as comfortable for the attorneys.
I wonder if there's also a way for, since you're working with them at the very beginning stages, to actually, remind them that, hey, think about saving like a tiny, put away just $10 a month, whatever it might be, so that by the time phase 2, 3, 4 come around, you don't have to scramble for it, but you can have a little bit of a
one thing that I've thought about a lot in terms of marketing and in terms of actually presenting our services and for sale, as essentially, is that the investment in your representation to win an asylum case, or for that matter any other kind of immigration case, is such a life-changing investment, not just for the individual client, but that client's kids, that client's family. It's as important an investment as going to college or buying a home. And I really think that we need to be conveying that to clients so that they're thinking broadly and globally towards the idea of this is an important life-changing investment that is going to make a positive impact on generations.
Yeah.
And so I totally agree with you. We should be saying that to clients.
And long-term thinking, it's a long-term plan, right? And not everyone is able to or has experience thinking that way. So I agree with you. There's a really great, interesting opportunity. It's everyone's situation is different, but you can imagine individuals who had to scrape by for much of their life, maybe where they came from, or as soon when they arrived here, they just don't think long term because they're so used to only thinking, I have to make this month, I have to make this week. And so introducing that thought process is a great opportunity. So,
and as asylum seekers, as people who are fleeing from an environment of danger, you wouldn't be thinking long term. You would be thinking, how do I survive today?
Yep, exactly.
Fortunately, with limited scope, we may be able to give the person that opportunity to adjust and to start to heal from whatever they were experiencing in their country.
Jared, I wanted to kind of, come to an end here and sort of ask you, you've watched so many immigration tech companies over the years. You've advised some. You're very much involved in the space. This is now your second tech company. What do you see in the, maybe let's say in the short-term future for Access 61? How do you see the company continue to evolve, the service continuing to evolve, especially with the changes in generative AI and just technology in general? What are you seeing for Access 61 moving forward?
Well, we've got a big TAM, big total addressable market. We've got the millions and millions of people that are in immigration court who don't have representation. A recent New York Times article citing Detract data spoke of the fact that over the last 5 years, representation in immigration court has dropped from 60% to 30%. So that's terrible because we know that people are far more likely to win their case if they are represented. And so that's really where we want to come in. I think we're lucky in that I don't know of any other immigration startups that are working in immigration court. Though, if any others do, we'll be happy to work with them too, because there's a lot of people that need help. At the same time, one of the trends that I've really noticed of the next generation of lawyers, but not just the next generation of lawyers, every generation of lawyers, is that people don't necessarily want to work for a law firm 60 hours a week for some brass ring at the end. People want to work when they want to work, from where they want to work, the amount of hours that they want to work, and have that fit into their lifestyle. And that's really what we're offering to immigration attorneys that work with us, is the ability to work when you want, how you want, and also to work in an area that I think is quite exciting to many immigration attorneys. Many of whom, need to work in business immigration or other things because of financial requirements. We give them the opportunity to come into immigration court and represent people in their asylum cases and make a difference on cases that really deeply matter to them, with that flexible work hours, flexible amount of work. And so it's our hope that our team can grow, and we can represent a lot of people, and that both us and our clients can find success by winning their cases, by becoming American citizens, and by changing the way that people are represented in immigration court.
So if you're listening to this and you're an immigration attorney, you want to learn more, access61.com is the website, right?
.org.
Or .org. Apologies.
Well, the dot, I own the .com, but somehow a little bug got inserted into our IP address, and we were listed as a spam site. So we're fighting our way through that. But in the meantime, .org is live.
You know what? And that is just a very quick lesson as the little things that come up when you're starting a business. Who knew, right? Well, Jared, Lory, thank you so much for being here, and for putting the time and energy into building this thing. And I think in a landscape where, as you were saying earlier, Jared, a lot of folks are understandably worried about how technology and specifically how AI will impact attorney jobs. Maybe where some people feel less fulfilled with their immigration job, or at the very least, just want a little bit more flexibility. I mean, I think there's so many positives to what you guys are building. So I wish you the best. I'm excited to watch it. Thank you for coming on the show at the very beginning, because this makes, this gives folks something to root for and something to watch as the company grows. And I appreciate both your time and energy in this, and for coming on the show. So thank you.
Thank you, Roman. You're a friend and a mentor, and I've learned so much from you, and it's always a pleasure to get to talk to you on your show. So thank you so much for having us.
I appreciate that. Likewise. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Amazing episode. Thank you, everybody who stuck around. All the great, I didn't get to all the comments and questions, but really wonderful questions here. And comments, and a lot of live discussion, which doesn't always happen. So that just goes to show you how much people really care about the idea behind, access to justice, and really using technology in a positive way to reach that. So I wanted to give a quick thank you once again to the main sponsor of this episode, Lex Reception, which, if you didn't hear it in the beginning, Lex Reception is a legal intake, reception, and client support service for law firms, including many immigration law firms. They provide phone call answering services, message answering services. They will schedule appointments, all in real time. And basically, they are your 24/7 legal answering specialist, so that you, as an immigration law firm, don't have to worry about missing phone calls or messages from clients or prospects again. You can use them even as a kind of a sales team. They're the first touch for potential clients that reach out and want to work with your firm. They can respond to forms and reach out to them. And again, they can integrate with various tools that you use in your at your law firm, and kind of become part of your technology stack, if you will. So if you're interested in learning more about Lex Reception for your immigration law firm, $250 off your first month of service with them, which is awesome. Check out the link in the show notes wherever you're listening to or watching this, or just reach out to them at lexreception.com. And when you chat with them, let them know you heard about them from the GMI Rocket show. So with that, thank you, everybody. No show next week because it is the AILA annual conference, and we will be there, but we'll be back shortly after that. In the meantime, as always, stay safe, and thank you for being here, and peace out.